Rentala Chandrashekhar joined the Indian Administrative Service back in the mid-70s. So he's got more than 3 decades of service. And primarily, bulk of it has been in the IT, communications, electronics context, high-tech context. He worked closely with the former Chief Minister of Andhra Pradesh, Mr. Chandrababu Naidu, where Mr. Naidu was called the politician, the visionary, the individual, the government civil servant who were actually kind of working closely with him to make all the changes that happened in AP and to AP become the beacon of IT advances in the country. Most of the credit can go to Mr. Rentala Chandrashekhar. His most recent role was as the top man at the Telecom department, where he resigned, where he stepped down as the Telecom Secretary earlier this year. Since then, he has been invited by NASSCOM to be its next president, the incoming president, which will be taking over the next couple of months, hopefully. So, both in terms of giving insights on how government can be a powerful driver for achieving scale, and both in terms of identifying how technology and all the recent developments in ICT can be used for making scale happen. There couldn't be no better.
Hope that you believe all that has been said. And particularly that I have such a big challenge in front of me, because you had a hot lunch, hotter weather, and then a cool auditorium. So I can't blame you if I find some of you nodding. But I must tell you that when Sanjay asked me to participate in this event, as he said, we had met once before, and very briefly. So it was not that I knew him very well, but the topic as he explained it to me was something which struck a chord, and something which I believe is not only true, but it is something which is an absolutely current imperative. But especially when we met, I think it was his intensity and his sincerity which certainly made me believe that this event could, in fact, make a significant difference. And I say this because I believe that as a country today, we are at a very significant inflection point. We have a huge set of challenges, but also we have a huge set of opportunities. And therefore, how we deal with this is going to be critical in determining whether we fall a victim to the challenges or we rise right to the top on the opportunities. There are many things which put India in a unique place across the whole globe today as a country. And in a sense, these are all the dots. And all those dots are there. And while there may be many predictions of gloom all around, and there may be many prophets of doom which abound in the country, I certainly believe that we should first thank ourselves for the dots which are there, because those who don't have those dots would never be able to make the leap which we are now in a position to make. Whether we will make it or not is a separate question. And that is really where the question of how you link the dots comes in, and what it takes to link the dots, and whether we have actually appreciated all of that. And as I would try to share my perspective, having been in the government, in the IT and the telecom sector for several years, and in infrastructure and in public-private partnerships. So the theme of this event and a lot of the subjects that have been talked about earlier are those which I have, in a sense, been involved with, although from the policy-making side. Since independence, we've been grappling with a lot of issues in terms of the age-old problems of poverty, malnutrition, hunger, health, skill development, employment, economic growth, etc., etc. And at one level, one may feel, somewhat disheartened by the fact that these are still very, very major problems in our country, and we have not reached even the status of a middle-income country, let alone a developed country. But equally, it's also important to remember that we have grown almost 3 to 4 times in the size of our population. And even to remain at that level itself has been a humongous challenge. This becomes obvious only when you exchange notes with people in other countries and the kind of challenges that they are facing. But it is therefore clear, and I think we would be very unfair to those who have led us over the years to say that no effort was made to deal with these problems. And certainly efforts have been made, and we've had very often a significant number of leaders who have really given a shape and direction to the efforts and to the dreams. But the size of these challenges and the complexities are such that perhaps they were not easy to resolve. However, now very different approaches are possible, maybe even necessary, which certainly lead to optimism that the problems, even though they are age-old, perhaps can be solved if we make use of everything that we have. And if you look at the three players, if you look at the government, you look at the industry, you look at civil society, and what all of them have been trying, because it's not that none of them have been doing anything, all of them have been doing a lot and have in fact accomplished quite a bit. But in their own way, within the limits that they were capable of. And that has taken us a part of the way. But by and large, they operated on their own, not as a team and not working together. That was the nature of the game at that time. What has changed this quite a lot is the advent of technology and the changes which have been wrought by technology, which have enabled people to be connected like never before, and which have enabled collaboration to such a point that people who don't collaborate perhaps can no longer compete, can no longer make the kind of innovations or the kind of progress which is possible. If you look at the government, what did they do well? Government is good at scale. If you look at any program, be it NREGA, be it education, be it health, the numbers are absolutely mind-boggling. There are probably no other country barring China which really has to deal with those kind of numbers. Substantial amount of money also has been put into these programs. So it's not that the attempt was not made on the scale which is required. It's not that money was not put into it. To the micro detail at the grassroots level. And particularly so considering the fact that it's a very large and complex country and there are so many variations. And I heard a lot about replicating innovation and replicating success, but I will share also some perspectives on the challenges even in replicating a so-called success. So this is, these are the strengths as well as the limitations of the government. If you look at the private sector, and I'll talk more about the private sector in the ICT space because I think that is something which holds great potential in this area in terms of applying it in the right manner. If you take the IT industry, what has happened in the last 20 years is a miracle by any standards. We've today got a globally recognized industry which is world class. It has grown from zero to $100 billion plus. In fact, it topped $100 billion last year in terms of its turnover. And I still remember in 1992 when I was in the Commerce Ministry, when there was a World Bank study which said this industry may actually grow to $1 billion by 1996, there were gasps of disbelief. And today we are at 100 billion. It's such a powerful tool. It's a meta sector after all. It can actually have impact on every single sector. It can have impact on manufacturing, it can have impact on health, it can have impact on education. You name it and it can effect a radical transformation if it is used in the right way. It has done so in many countries. And the Indian IT industry is actually helping it to happen in other countries. But ironically, not that much of an impact on how it is done within the country. In part, this is because the industry also was focused on the global market. Even today, 80% of the revenues come from the international market. And the focus from a bottom line point of view was always on the dollar revenues and so on. So there was relatively little attention towards the domestic market. Things have changed dramatically. The global economy is in decline in many parts of the world. Opportunities are limited. And margins are getting squeezed. And to add to their woes, there are protectionist tendencies coming up in many countries. So the search for new pastures has compelled a situation where people have to move up the value chain and have to innovate, go into products, do new things in order to continue to grow. Equally, they have to also look at what can be done within the domestic market. And by a happy coincidence, a lot of the innovation and a lot of the product development actually can be better done when you're looking at a domestic market. If you look at a lot of the innovation in ICT which has happened, much of it has happened in the US. It's focused on a global market, it's focused on addressing the global market through the internet, but the US is the anchor market. And therefore, innovation has to be rooted in the reality in which it is occurring. It's extremely difficult to envisage a lot of innovation happening in India, which is actually sorting out problems in some other country. So if you're looking at product development and you're looking at innovation, then the domestic market is the place where it should actually happen. So for a variety of reasons, today, as the Indian IT industry has set itself an aspiration that we want to grow as an industry from $100 billion today to over $300 billion by 2020. Now, for those of you who are familiar with the implications of these numbers, to go from 0 to 100 was a miracle, but to grow from 100 to 300 billion is going to be 10 times as difficult. Though it's only a growth on paper of 3 times, to grow from such a big size 3 times within this short period of 7 years. There have been many studies, many of which have shown that actually this kind of growth will only be possible if you are actually doing new things. As much as 70 to 75% of this growth will come from services and products which simply don't exist today. Which means that we are actually going to see a whole lot of things being done differently. So this is the story on the IT side. On the telecom side, there's an equally interesting development which has happened, and that is that over the last decade or so, a lot of interesting things have happened. And while all the attention may have been focused on some number which starts with 1, 7 and 6 and a lot of zeros, the reality is that we have actually grown to a market which now has as many as 900 million subscribers. And even if you discount the fact that these are only subscribers and SIM cards, there are at least 5 to 600 million people, individuals, who are connected today. Now, in a country of a billion, that effectively means that you have got almost every family on the radar. And what can you now do with that connectivity? It's fine that we like to talk and we are all connected with each other, but there's a lot else that you can do with that. And today the telecom industry is facing a lot of problems. They're facing a lot of problems partly because of the fallout of the spectrum and the scams and all that, and the high cost of spectrum today. They're also facing the problems of a high level of loan. Their debt equity ratios are out of shape, so they're all facing a lot of debt. So they all know that you can't continue to grow. After all, you're already covered more than half the population. So growth is only going to come from data and from services. And that growth has been phenomenal in the last few months. So they need this innovation for them to survive also. And the kind of application of ICT to solve these problems in new ways, to solve old problems in new ways much more cost effectively, is actually going to ride on the telecom infrastructure, and it actually needs to leverage the IT. If we didn't have either of them, then sorry, you can dream on, nothing is going to happen. We've got all of this, we're sitting on all, it's already there. And on top of it, now the government also has a program, and just at lunchtime, one of the gentlemen here, who is the Health Secretary from Karnataka, and who leads the NRHM program in the state, was asking me, when does this project of setting up optical fiber to every single panchayat in the country, when does it get completed, when does it get ready, when can I connect all my PHCs so that we can actually provide a qualitatively different kind of health service to people. That is underway even as we speak, and in the next year or so, we expect that that would be completed, which means every single panchayat would be connected, and at the panchayat, through Wi-Fi, the local connectivity would also become available. Now, if you had a billion people who are connected, if you had broadband which went down to the panchayats and you had Wi-Fi at the local level, what are all the things that you could do? How would you do what you are doing today differently to make it more effective, to reach the same scale that we are trying to do today, but to reach the quality which has been achieved only in pockets? Now that brings me to the third part of this triad, which is the civil society organizations and the non-government or not-for-profit organizations, or today the evolution of a new breed of social entrepreneurs who are actually combining social good with business viability, and thereby creating an opportunity not just to do social good but to also in the process earn a living, make profits, and I would dare say derive a lot more satisfaction with what they are doing. In the case of a lot of civil society organizations, and I've had occasion to interact with a very large number of civil society organizations in the course of my stay in the IT ministry, and to some extent in the telecom as well. And some of them have achieved very remarkable results. And it's extremely impressive, it's very heartening, and you really feel charged when you go there and you see the passion with which people are doing things and how it has made a difference to the lives of people. But then it's in pockets, it's in small pockets. And their challenge is they are able to deliver quality. They have a big challenge when it comes to scaling up. The second thing is, because the social entrepreneurship concept is a recent phenomenon, a lot of these people actually did what they are doing through grant money. Now, I have nothing against grant money, but the problem is that grant money is not necessarily very good in terms of providing an impetus to creating viable business models. So when you are implementing, say, a health scheme or a skill development scheme or some education project, you don't actually have a very strong view, or you don't have a one eye fixed on, is this making sense? If you take education, for example, and this is a question which is constantly battered with, it's all very well to say that, we will, through ICT, will provide high quality education right down to the villagers. The person in the village can get the quality of education that the best school in Delhi provides. Every college student can get access to the best material that an IIT provides. We know it's true. It's not a pipe dream, it's not an exaggeration. But the fact is that all of this does require a certain amount of investment and a certain amount of money. And if you look at the schools, for example, the schools in the villages, and for many of you who work in the field, you know that in many schools there have been huge challenges. A lot of them didn't have buildings or blackboards or chalk. Many of them didn't have schools. I remember when I was a sub-collector, I went to one school in a tribal area. I was working as a tribal project officer for a tribal development agency. This was in my third year of service, and you had to go by car up to a point, by jeep from that point onwards, and then by boat up to the further point, and then by walk by 12 kilometers to reach that village. And when I reached the village, I went to the school, and I found, to my pleasant surprise, that the teacher was teaching. But then a little more investigation showed that he was not the teacher who was appointed there. He was a subcontractor whom the teacher said, you do the teaching and I will give you a part of my salary. And he was doing something else. So I was in all the youthful sort of passion. I said, I am going to suspend him and he must be dismissed and so on. Till some seniors who were also there at that time advised me and counseled me not to be so rash and said, actually he is far more conscientious than many people who simply don't teach at all. He's at least ensured that there are people to teach them. So that was my first sort of, in a sense, grounding on the realities of life and how you have to deal with all of this. So many things which look very good on paper, actually on the ground, there are a lot of challenges. So the point is that, so we know that whether you take the government or you take the private sector or you take the civil society organizations, each of them has strengths which are quite unique. And it's sometimes fashionable for each to look at the other with a certain degree of contempt. The government looks at the civil society organization and says, oh, that's okay, they're just doing 20 schools and that is not even my, a margin of error in my budget. You're better off just pouring it down the Ganga. And if you look at the private sector, then they would say that, all these guys are totally inefficient and they don't know how to scale and we've been there and done it. Now, I think that it's good to be self-critical and on that perhaps we score very highly as a nation. But at the same time, I have little respect for anybody who is merely critical without offering a better option. And that is really where today's technologies have matured to a point where now they enable combinations which are simply not possible earlier. You can have configurations to deal with problems like health, education, adult literacy, skill development and so on, which actually bring together the strengths of the government and the private sector and the civil society organizations using the power of these technologies. Now, let me give a few examples of what it actually means when you start looking at the same problem differently from the way you were looking at. Let's take one example of financial inclusion. A lot of times we talk about the importance of financial inclusion in a country like India, so that where people who are in villages or people who are poor don't have access to basic banking services. They can't save money and earn interest on that. They can't get a loan and make an investment even if they are credit worthy. And if you talk to any banker, they would certainly be very wary about opening a branch everywhere because it just doesn't make business sense to set up a brick and mortar structure. Therefore, the innovation of bringing in banking correspondents, etc., etc. And there have been a lot of efforts which have been made to find new ways of bridging the gaps. Even that has not actually worked. But think of it this way, that today with a combination of the technologies that are available today, you can actually have a system which allows you to get all kinds of banking services simply through the mobile phone. And the cost of the transaction, which used to be as much as $4 per transaction in many of the developed countries. I remember when in the late 1990s, when I used to be in the Commerce Ministry and deal with EDI, the cost of the electronic transaction was $4. And at that time, the rupee was 30 rupees to a dollar. So you are talking about a transaction cost of over 100 rupees, whereas in India, the value which I want to transfer may be 100 rupees or less. So innovation in India and in the Indian context means very different things from innovation in a Western country. The question is not if, for example, you are able to do something with $100 in a Western country. Innovation will be, can I do twice that with the same $100? The challenge in innovation in India is, can I do 80% of what is being done with $100 but at $1. That's a very different kind of ball game, and it requires innovation in technology, it requires innovation in the business models also. The mobile industry, for example, has already shown how mere business innovation can actually create a big difference. And for all its ills, in the telecom sector, the cost of the service was the lowest in India for a variety of reasons. And there are also a number of business innovations like, for example, the incoming call free, which allowed a lot of people who otherwise may not have been able to afford a phone to not only get it, but to actually have access to economic opportunity, be it employment or be it marketing or be it some other kinds of services which actually gave them more income or reduced their expenses. So the point again is that in a Western society, many of these would be consumption items, or many of them would actually be convenience items. In a context like India, it actually has to be an income supplementation. It actually has to be a cost reduction for it to make sense, and for more than 500 million people to actually want to use it. So when you talk about something like financial inclusion, the question is, can you do it at 10 paisa per transaction? And let me tell you, and I'm telling you this with some awareness, because I actually chaired a committee, an interministerial group which the government of India had set up to look at the business of mobile financial services. And as a part of the report, this kind of picture was presented. There are regulatory challenges, and to begin with, the first challenge was whether this is going to be bank-led or telecom-led, and the financial regulatory system insisted that it should be bank-led, which was accepted. And as you go forward, there are other issues, but the point is, it is still not happening even today. And in part, this is because a lot of the structures that exist today are based on a very different business model. So this is disruptive. This is truly disruptive. We are going to destroy a lot of business models. But can we afford not to bring in systems which actually can provide this kind of an efficiency? These are the kinds of innovations that we will really have to be looking at. And the other point on which I think a lot of store can be set, and gives a ground for a lot of hope, is that today there are a lot of companies which are now thinking differently and looking at starting their own company, creating new kinds of services, whether mobile value-added services in the health sector, in the education sector, and so on. Simple things like you all, I'm sure, would have come across the story of the young man who devised a system where you can use the mobile phone to turn on a pump set which is kilometers away in the field. You don't have to walk there in order to turn it on. You don't have to walk there to check whether the power is available. All that can be done through the mobile phone. There's another group in Kerala, I think, who came up with an application which actually provided a simple service to people. You want to know, you are standing at the bus stop, you want to know when your bus is coming. And there's a simple system which was all worked out on the mobile, which can tell you when your bus is coming. Now, if you look at pure technology-based solution, or you look at a model which has emanated from a developed economy, you'll probably end up fitting GPS systems on every bus and having a central knock sitting somewhere connected with fast broadband mobile, and end up paying 500 or 1,000 rupees. But then if you had 1,000 rupees to pay for a service like this, you probably wouldn't be traveling in a bus anyway. So the point is that relevant innovation, and I don't mean by relevant innovation that you are going to get an inferior grade of technology. You're actually going to use advanced technologies, but to do things very differently. So the fact that today you have a lot of young people who are actually thinking of this, and who are increasingly from IITs or NITs or IIITs or IIMs, actually thinking of this in preference to looking for the best corporate job they can get or looking for the fastest route to the green card. I think this is a very important development, and the fact that we are at that point is also one of the dots which we need to really think of how do we connect all of this. And I had again during the lunchtime conversation a gentleman who was associated with one of the initiatives which is actually aimed at encouraging students to either write papers or get into innovation or think of starting up companies. And I think that when the right guidance and mentorship is given, then you will have more and more students thinking of that. And therefore the challenge in a sense before us is how do we convert this so-called demographic edge that we have. And I would still say that the jury is out on whether it's a demographic millstone or a demographic advantage that we have. It all depends on how you use it. So how do you convert this entire population and the entire set of people who are coming out of the education system? How do you ensure that a substantial percentage of them are looking around at the problems that exist in the country and then trying to find innovative solutions? So when you talk about innovation ecosystem, then I think that's very much a part of the innovation ecosystem. And the fact that today the government, the industry, and the civil society organizations are all looking for that, each for very different reasons, mind you. But the fact is that they all come to that stage at this point. And we have the base on which that can be built. So I definitely do believe that this is the time really to ride that way. It does require a huge amount of effort to actually arrive at a consensus in terms of how do we move forward or how do we try and work together. How do you align what the government is trying to do with what industry is trying to do, with what social entrepreneurs or civil society organizations are trying to do? I was hearing Mr. Deshpande in the morning with a lot of interest about how we can try and look at the way the way angel investors, for example, fund companies, and how you filter down from 5,000 to 500 to 50 to 5 and so on, and whether such a model can be applied for the social entrepreneurs and whether they can be funded by the government. But governments have their own way of looking at these things, and that has to be factored into this calculation. And while such experimentation is necessary, and governments are terrible at making subjective decisions, partly because they don't have the skills required, and partly because for such decision making to happen, there needs to be a very high degree of trust in the people who are making that decision, and that's not a condition obtaining today. So the fact is that up to the point where subjective decisions are required and where you have to identify the talent. Now I speak to a lot of equity investors and venture capitalists and angel funders. And the story I keep hearing from all of them is that we look at the business model, we look at all the projections and this and that and make sure it all makes sense. We look at the technology. Finally, the bottom line is we look at how sincere and how committed the guy is, and how likely he is to stay the course, and his integrity. So these are all the kind of decisions which it is extremely difficult, and in today's environment, I dare say, impossible for governments to make. So can we have a system where in the early phase of innovation by social entrepreneurs, by startups, they are funded by private investments, by such angel investors or by venture capitalists, with a clear view that what has to come out of this is a business model which is scalable. Now the other thing is, if you think that I will create a wonderful scalable model and then the government will be forced to pick it up because it's reasonable to do so, don't bet your last rupee that the government will behave reasonably. doesn't necessarily happen that way because they will have their own idea. So even at the very initial stages, some of these do require a certain amount of, if not, it's not just in terms of government funding, but in terms of a more collaborative approach, saying, okay, if you take the NRHM scheme, for example, we have here one of the directors in Karnataka state here. How do you actually put all of these together? How do you bring together organizations consisting of social entrepreneurs and the government people who are responsible for the project, and the private industry which has the technology and the competencies required to actually design the full solution, provided all the specs and requirements are given. And believe me, this is harder than it sounds, even though all the capacities exist individually, because technology can link people together. Technology can help you to find solutions, but it doesn't bring hearts and minds together. It can only connect them. But bringing them together is something which actually has to be worked on, and that's why actually events like this become very, very important. And that is the area where I feel a lot of these kind of projects flounder. And in many cases, the government, for a variety of reasons, doesn't behave in the manner in which a businessman would expect it to behave, or a voluntary organization would expect it to behave, and vice versa. And each consists of intelligent people, and even if all of them have the highest integrity, they will still behave differently. And therefore, I think such a collaborative approach actually requires, aligning interests and working out approaches which actually is done collaboratively. And then as the experimentation proceeds, I don't think there would be any difficulty in any government for a collaboration where the government actually doesn't need to spend money but just be a part of it, with the understanding that once you achieve certain goals which the government has in mind, then it will be integrated into the way the government implements those programs. So it goes into the design of the government programs themselves. So there are two different ways. Either the successes on the ground lead to government itself designing its programs differently by integrating these successes into that program, or, and my sense is that this is more challenging in today's environment, the government actually goes out and funds the successful entrepreneurs to scale up and solve a public policy problem. Both are approaches which perhaps are needed, and we need to keep an eye on both of these possibilities. So these are some of the perspectives which I thought I should share with you, and I do hope that an event like this would lead to many more such events, particularly relating to the social sector, and in particular that these events are not treated as an end in themselves but actually spawn a greater degree of such collaborative partnerships in the design and execution and implementation of solutions. The last thought I want to leave with you is that whatever experience I have had, there are issues with regard to replicating successes, and I promised you that I would share that with you, but so I will stick to that. We found that even in hardcore technology projects, e-governance projects and so on, many people are allergic to the word replication. Because he says, if I'm just replicating what somebody else has done, how does it reflect on me, or do I really get recognized for that? So you have to, number one, factor that into account, but it's not only about ego. The other is that the conditions are so different in different states that to expect that something which works in one part, in another part, is not necessarily true. And therefore, even while replicating, you have to leave room. And I heard somebody saying earlier that you need to distill out that 70% or 80%, which is common, and leave room for that 30%. And maybe if you're doing that, you need to find a word different from replication. Means the same thing. Finally, what needs to be done is clear. But it leaves enough room for people to actually put in the variations that are required for their own environment and create their own successes. So I don't see necessarily that the kind of quantum leap that we would make would be the result of 2 or 3 breakthrough innovations, but rather a result of thousands of small innovations which are happening all over the place, and not something which is designed or architected or masterminded by somebody sitting at the top, be it in government or be it in industry or be it in civil society organizations. So we are really talking about an ecosystem in which there are a whole lot of players working together and actually working towards certain consensual goals. And I think that's the kind of ecosystem which we need to evolve to. As a country, I think we are well placed to do that, and I wish all of you the best in your endeavors as you go forward. Thank you.